Brigitte Bardot wasn't just a movie star. She became a symbol, and later, a contradiction. While the world remembers her as the face of 1950s French cinema, another version of Bardot slowly took shape over the decades. One that sparked admiration, outrage, and endless debate, often at the same time. This isn't about canceling her, and it's not about defending her either. It's about how one of the most celebrated actresses in history became just as famous for the controversies that followed her long after she stepped away from the screen. And once you see how these moments connect, her legacy starts to look very different. To understand why Brigitte Bardot's name still divides people today, you have to go back to the moment she stopped being just an actress. In the mid-1950s, Bardot exploded onto the global stage with "And God Created Woman." The film itself wasn't shocking by today's standards, but at the time, it completely rewrote what femininity, freedom, and desire looked like on screen. Overnight, Bardot became a cultural symbol. But that image came with consequences. Her public persona was openly sensual in an era that wasn't prepared for it, and the media quickly shifted its focus from her performances to her personal life. Relationships, marriages, affairs, everything became public discussion. And while tabloids framed it as scandal, Bardot herself would later describe it as something closer to restlessness, a constant search for intensity, passion, and escape from expectations she never asked for. That pattern, intense devotion followed by sudden rejection, wouldn't just define her relationships, it would later define her public statements as well. And this is where the story quietly begins to change. As Bardot stepped away from acting in the early 1970s, many assumed she was leaving controversy behind. Instead, she was entering a new chapter, one that would place her back in headlines for reasons that had nothing to do with film. She devoted herself to animal rights activism, a cause that earned her real praise and international support. For many, this reinforced the image of Bardot as someone guided by conviction rather than popularity. But over time, her activism began to overlap with political commentary. And that overlap is where things started to unravel. Public letters, published books, interviews that didn't age quietly, statements that, according to multiple court rulings and publicly available records, crossed legal and ethical lines in France. What shocked many people wasn't just what was said, but how consistently it happened, even after consequences followed. And that raises a difficult question. How does someone go from being a symbol of liberation to becoming associated with division? That answer isn't simple, and it doesn't come from a single moment. It comes from a pattern. What made Bardot's later years so difficult to contextualize wasn't a single incident. It was repetition. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Bardot repeatedly used books, letters, and interviews to comment on social and political issues in France. According to court records and widely reported coverage at the time, several of those statements resulted in legal penalties. Each ruling followed a familiar cycle: a public statement, widespread backlash, legal consequences, and then another statement. Supporters argued she was exercising free expression. Critics argued the language crossed into harmful territory. And Bardot herself refused to retreat. Instead, she framed her position as honesty without compromise, often insisting she was being misunderstood or unfairly targeted. That refusal to soften her language became part of her identity, and, for many, part of the problem. But what complicates the story even further is that these controversies existed alongside work that was widely praised. Her Animal Rights Foundation continued to receive attention, donations, and recognition. To some, this made the contradictions even harder to reconcile. How could the same person be celebrated for compassion and criticized for rhetoric that courts deemed unacceptable? That tension became the defining feature of her public image. Then came the generational divide. As social conversations shifted globally, Bardot's past statements didn't fade into obscurity. They resurfaced. Old interviews were re-examined. Excerpts from her books were shared with new audiences encountering them for the first time. And for viewers who only knew Bardot as a cinematic icon, the contrast was jarring. This disconnect reached another peak in 2018 when Bardot publicly criticized the #Me Too movement. Her remarks, reported by major international outlets, sparked immediate backlash and renewed debate around her worldview. Once again, Bardot positioned herself outside the cultural shift, not as someone seeking dialogue, but as someone rejecting the premise entirely. For some, this confirmed a long-held view that she had become detached from the realities of the modern world. For others, it reinforced the idea that she had never been interested in aligning with public opinion to begin with. Either way, the response was swift and polarized. And importantly, it wasn't just critics who reacted. Former admirers, fans of her films, and even people who supported her activism began to reassess how they spoke about her legacy. Not with outrage, but with uncertainty. At this point, Bardot was no longer just a historical figure from cinema. She was an active participant in contemporary controversy. And that raises an uncomfortable question many biographies avoid. Can legacy be separated from later actions? Or does time only make contradictions more visible? For Bardot, time didn't soften the conversation, it sharpened it. As the years went on, something subtle but important happened. The conversation around Brigitte Bardot stopped being about individual statements and started being about interpretation. Media coverage shifted. Articles no longer framed her simply as a controversial figure, but as a case study in how fame, influence, and personal conviction collide over time. Headlines became more careful. Language became more contextual, not because the controversies disappeared, but because the public grew more cautious about how legacy is discussed. Instead of asking, "What did she say?" the question slowly became, "What does it mean when someone refuses to evolve publicly?" For some commentators, Bardot represented a generation that never adapted to changing norms. For others, she symbolized the dangers of elevating celebrities to moral authorities in the first place. And yet, neither side could ignore one thing. Her impact was real. Her films are still studied. Her image is still referenced. Her influence on fashion, cinema, and pop culture remains undeniable. That's what made the conversation so complicated, because Bardot wasn't erased, she was reframed. In documentaries and retrospectives, her life began to be presented in fragments rather than conclusions. The actress, the activist, the provocateur. Each version told a different truth depending on where you entered the story. And this fragmented approach revealed something deeper. Bardot had outlived the era that once protected her from scrutiny. In the 1950s and 60s, public figures were rarely held accountable in real time. By the 2000s, accountability had become central to public discourse, and Bardot found herself navigating a world that no longer separated admiration from critique. But unlike many public figures facing backlash, she didn't apologize strategically. She didn't pivot. She didn't retreat quietly. She stayed. That persistence, whether seen as integrity or stubbornness, became the final layer of her public image. What's often missed in simplified narratives is that Bardot never asked to be remembered a certain way. She didn't attempt reputation management. She didn't craft a final public persona. And that absence of control left the work to everyone else. Critics, supporters, historians, audiences discovering her for the first time, each group arriving with different expectations and leaving with different conclusions. By the time discussions about her legacy became common online, Bardot was no longer speaking into the void. The conversation had moved on without her. And in that silence, a broader reflection emerged. Not just about Bardot, but about celebrity itself. What happens when a cultural icon refuses to disappear, but also refuses to adapt? In the end, Brigitte Bardot's story resists a clean conclusion. She remains a symbol of artistic freedom, cultural impact, and undeniable influence, while also standing as an example of how public words carry weight long after the spotlight shifts. For some, her legacy will always begin and end with cinema. For others, it will be inseparable from the controversies that followed. And maybe that's the point. Because Bardot's life forces an uncomfortable but necessary conversation. How do we remember people who shaped culture, but also challenged its boundaries in ways that don't age well? Not by erasing their work, not by ignoring their actions, but by holding both truths at the same time. Understanding legacy isn't about choosing a side, it's about recognizing complexity. And in Bardot's case, complexity is the one thing that never faded.